Hello, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for joining us for our 8th webinar in this series titled Treasures in the Attic, Capital Campaigns for New and Improved Facilities. So the House of Development is a concept developed by Cogio to illustrate the building blocks of a successful organization and explain why development is so crucial to fundraising, recruiting, and achieving your organization's goals. I'm going to start off with a little housekeeping. My name's Whit Godden, and I'm the Director of Strategic Marketing over here at TAP Network. For those of you joining us for the first time, TAP Network is a full-service marketing and technology agency that focuses on building marketing strategies and technology solutions for nonprofits that support the unique needs and challenges of an impact-driven organization. Like I said, I'll be moderating the webinar along with introducing our main speaker today. And I wanted to let you all know that we will be taking questions at the end. Those as desktop viewers, you're able to submit questions through the chat option on the GoToWebinar interface. However, people who have dialed in will not be able to submit questions, but are more than welcome to contact us afterward. And now for the main speaker, Rob Kusel, Managing Director of Cogio. Cogio provides organizational advice and development services to nonprofits to optimize their efficiency and long-term sustainability. He's worked with organizations such as Essex and Drake Fundraising Council, Blue Oak School, Stanford University, and his own alma mater, Williams College. And now I'll hand things off to Rob to begin the lesson.
Thanks, Whit. So as you can see on slide 3, we're all the way up to the attic. We're on the 3rd floor. And today we're going to focus on capital projects, which includes campaigns for new and improved facilities, although we've seen endowment campaigns as well. The next slide, 4, again, is a visual demonstration of the building blocks that are needed in order to qualify for capital campaign, capital project. So essentially, you need to have strong PR marketing, really well established. You need to have a generation of donors in terms of the event and annual membership giving rooms on the 1st floor. You need to have good relationships with a lot of foundations in your local area, as well as businesses. A well-established and robust major gift program is a natural segue toward a capital campaign. And ironically, a capital campaign will also allow you, if you haven't already, to launch a legacy society around planned giving. So that's essential. So as you're talking to your board of directors and considering a capital campaign or a capital project, a build out, facility improvement, whatever it might be, you really need to assess whether you've got the building blocks that are needed in order to qualify. The next slide, number 5, here are the goals and context for today. We're going to define, really understand needs assessment, feasibility or planning study, and capital campaigns and how they fit together to successfully manage and complete a capital project. We're going to talk about analyzing and evaluating project readiness, really obtaining a better scope on how to analyze and evaluate the agency's readiness for a capital project. Campaign management, because you cannot forego annual giving or your other building blocks. Those have to be maintained at the standard pace, if not improved upon. So you really have to manage it alongside your other programmatic funding areas tactically. And then how moves management and data management really understand their roles in capital projects and campaigns, and how clean and organized data systems are vital to a capital project success. And Whit's going to focus on that. The next slide. So what is a capital project? It's really a term to describe the entire process from start to finish of building and or purchasing a physical asset It involves 3 logical steps. So it's from bottom to top, going down the road toward the green flag of success. A, needs assessment, really understanding how this capital project is going to benefit not just the agency who's looking to do it, but also the greater community that it serves. That's critical. And there has to be a firm understanding that both are being met in terms of benefit to the community. A planning or feasibility study will test the potential success of the campaign, as well as leverage other assets for the campaign, such as leadership. And then the campaign itself is the fundraising component to raise usually larger assets for an organization's physical augmentation or improvement, renovation. So let's look at the various components. The first on slide 7 is the needs assessment process. And it all starts generally with a strategic retreat with the board and executive staff, from which emanate strategic priorities, one of which may in fact be a capital improvement or capital build out or endowment build out process, as well as a legacy society establishment, which will correlate with the endowment build out. If in fact that becomes a strategic imperative, then there'll be a project identification and clarification. Once that's been defined, then you do a needs assessment in terms of what the footprint, etc. But let's get clear on that. Next, slide 8. Once you've got a very good idea of what it is you're trying to accomplish and footprint and square footage, really the parameters of the actual build out, then you should consider a feasibility study, particularly if you don't have a great handle on your constituencies. There are 5 phases in a planning feasibility study. First is a preparation phase where with the consultants, and it has to be a third-party consulting firm doing this, you build out an interviewee list of key individuals externally who need to be interviewed. You build a case for support, which is different than a case statement. A case for support is what you're testing. A case statement is what you're eventually shopping and trying to get people to invest into. And then you're going to have a custom questionnaire. Think of 50 questions that'll deal strictly around campaign goals and all the stuff that's needed to have a successful campaign. Then half the interviews are conducted. You're really asking the same questions repeatedly to various individuals. Generally speaking, there needs to be a significant sample of 28 interviews for the study to be quote unquote valid. Mid-study report, once you're halfway done with the interviews, you might make adjustments in terms of the questionnaire, or really just come back with feedback to the executive team in particular and the chairman of the board. You finalize the interviews, and then you build out a final report, which includes either a green light or a red light with a go-forward plan for the campaign. If it is a red light, generally it's because there needs to be additional preparation work in order to be successfully launched. Ironically, our company has red lit more campaigns than green lit, which is to say you really need to be very prepared to be successful, and there can never be anything nebulous in a capital campaign. The next slide, these are great, these next few slides, because they really create subjectivity around real readiness. Are you ready to actually launch a campaign? You've done your feasibility study, you've gotten good results, and so the recommendation is launch. But here are the factors you need to consider successively, really. Collateral, is it there? Leadership, do you have the proper leadership to access all of the qualified sectors that you know need to be accessed over the course of a 3-year period? And that leadership of the steering committee generally grows. Qualified prospects, do you have them across 4 key areas? And government, particularly in low-income areas, they become highly relevant agencies. So think park and recreation, county, state, and even federal to a certain extent. Foundations, businesses, and high net worth individuals. So those need to be analyzed. Do you have the proper campaign structure in terms of the phased? And then any other elements that you feel are needed in order for your campaign to be successful. Next slide, the checklist goes on. This is a critical piece, which is campaign collateral, which ranges from a one-pager to a more elaborate case statement, many of which can be seen at the Cogeo website, cogeo.us/case. We see a lot of video, compelling video, as well as other documentation as needed. So it's really important to have that. Now, if you're not in a capital campaign and you're doing a major gift program, which you should also have a case statement, and that should just be renewed every year. If for 2020, we're in the process of renewing many of our clients' case statements to reflect the transition from 2019 to 2020. Any of our clients who, in fact, are in a major gift campaign, that's occurring. Next slide, again, more readiness. This one particularly around leadership, and 6 good questions. Who's on the board? What are their roles? In other words, do they have the bandwidth to be able to take a leadership role in the capital campaign? That cannot be assumed because it's very, very specific work, and it's an expertise that is still pretty narrow in terms of the number of individuals who have been involved in large capital campaigns. What subcommittees currently exist of the board? Is there a development committee? And how will that morph into a campaign steering committee? Are you currently recruiting any specific individuals? If so, who in terms of the campaign? And also, are there past board members or others who could be leveraged? And which key community leaders that are not board members also need to be engaged for this to be successful? E.g., we call them AAA prospects. They have affinity to your agency. It's the first A, affinity. They have access to funding sources because of their relationships. And then the third, which is sort of icing on the cake, which is they have affluence themselves and can lead by making an important gift to the campaign. Leadership is really critical outside of the executive director. Now, who's going to make the asks? The executive director. She will make the asks because boards are subject to blowback, which is, sure, I'll give to your board, Kathy, or to your campaign, Kathy, but I'm on the board of the YMCA, and we're in a campaign as well, and so I really want you to consider a gift to our campaign. That's called blowback, and it's really important that the executive director be trained and that she be really, really comfortable making large asks if in a capital campaign. There are ways to train people if they don't have the background. One last thought on leadership. If you do not have someone within your leadership team, either on the board of directors, although that's not optimal, but definitely within the executive team, the administrative team, who has not led or been heavily involved in a capital campaign, you will want to get outside guidance. And I've got several examples of agencies with which we're working or about to go to work who have large development offices with very competent staff, but they also know their limitations. Therefore, they're coming to us for direction in their next build out. More readiness on the next slide, number 12. This is, again, qualified prospects. And here, obviously, we're referring to your CRM system, right? So Razor's Edge Blackbaud was the fad for a long time. Donor Perfect Online has had some traction. Now we're seeing Salesforce really take off. And when I say Razor's Edge, I'm including eTapestry there as well. Salesforce is great. We're a big proponent, Cogeo. Why? Because it's a great product. 2, they're committed to the 501c3 industry. 3, 12 free licenses, up to 12 free licenses per agency if you qualify. And then there are a lot of other legacy systems that we're seeing out there, whether it's Little Green Light or, I mean, I can name 5 or 10. The key is to leverage it and really know how to leverage it so that when it comes time for a campaign, you triage correctly, you're really using it as a resource and sourcing it so that your campaign can really be effective. Because candidly, campaigns are about triaging lists and crunching lists, sheets, if you're on Google. So if in fact you've got a CRM or a place where you're storing donor information and donor data, you need to understand how many entities. And by an entity, we mean a singular address. Right? It could be 2 people, it could be a company, it could be a foundation, it could be a government agency. But how many of those entities are currently in your CRM system? And most importantly, in preparation for the campaign or your major gift program, have these entities undergone well screening, which is, if you're not familiar, the legacy systems were Researcher's Edge for Blackbaud, Wealth Engine was the agnostic one, and now there's some very, very good products, including the one that we use and leverage for our clients. Now, let's talk about well screening and then planning and feasibility studies. Because feasibility studies, really you're getting qualified information that's not necessarily genuine, right? Because you're interviewing individuals and you're asking questions about, okay, well, who needs to be involved in the campaign for it to be successful? Where should they look for gifts, et cetera? But it's really just information that's coming from a third party, which may or may not be accurate. So planning studies are sometimes essential. However, because of the advent of well screening and it's getting better, planning studies are becoming less essential because the real information is, one, what is the actual wealth of your population, your net worth of your population in aggregate, and then individually, and have they made the kind of gifts that we will need in our campaign for us to be successful? Have they made those kinds of gifts elsewhere? Whether it's the foundation or high net worth individuals or the various businesses or government agencies. So that's a really important component as you enter into either a major gifts program or a capital campaign. Slide 13, let's talk more specifically about corporations and foundations. And for corporations, it's really important to understand this landscape because there are 2 things going on. One, what are the current relationships with local businesses, if any? So you need to assess very candidly, what are those relationships? And to be sure, there are 4 types of businesses. And we'll start from the bottom up. LLPs, limited liability partnerships, those are great because it's 1, 2, well, I should say 2, 3, 4, whatever decision makers, and they can make a decision almost like an individual. LLC is better because it's 1 person generally making that decision. S Corp, very similar in structure, different liability. And then the tougher one is a C Corp. Those are the larger corporations, generally publicly traded, dividends, and they're accountable. Therefore, they have to have protocols and procedures. And you know who they are. Think Costco, Target, the larger corporations that actually have community outreach and foundations. Matching gift programs at C Corps are prevalent as well. Make sure you leverage those, particularly in a campaign, because their gifts will be larger. And generally, the larger corporations can match up to 5,000, if not more. So those are the ingredients to understand the various types of businesses. So don't be overwhelmed by the word business, but rather say, okay, what am I dealing with? How many decision makers? And if it's a C Corp, what are the protocols involved? And who are the influencers that we may have access to that can help move things along? So that's business. On the foundation end, you really need to understand what your relationships are with the synergistic local foundations and national if it's relevant. Now, what we've learned is that in general, foundations, for the most part, are giving either to programmatic or to capital. We don't see, well, I shouldn't say that because we just saw one in Delaware that gives to both capital and programmatic. And actually, one of our clients is going to put forth two proposals, one around ops and the other around their capital improvement project. But for the most part, it's either programs or capital. Now, when our clients go into a capital campaign, we recommend that they also look at programmatic because, in fact, if they can raise dollars for programs that were incremental, that they weren't counting on, money can then be steered toward the capital or to a reserve fund. So it's a great opportunity in a capital campaign to actually enhance your programmatic outreach for foundations as well. There are tools. We've got great tools at Cogeo that we use to do analysis in terms of finding those synergistic or relevant foundations, and then also making sure that you understand who the leadership is and what their role is in the community. We do not recommend setting forth a proposal that is not going to be stewarded by somebody who actually has a relationship. That's the best formula. We've done it where you submit, but the rate of success is not as high, particularly in a campaign, whereas it being stewarded. And then the second thing, I've mentioned this, but I'll reiterate it, which is do the research and keep doing it year to year, and have dedicated resources around this. And I'll talk about staffing in a second, but it's really worth your time because they do give away quite a bit of money, as we know. More on readiness and campaign structure. This is really important because a campaign is a different field than annual giving, than an event. The most important takeaway, and this comes at quite a shock to those entities or agencies who've not been in a campaign. We're used to it, so we're immune. But the key thing to understand is the capital campaign in general is very non-linear, right? So you'll get a large gift or two 1 week, and then nothing much might happen for a month, and then again that happens, and so you have these highs and lows, and it can be very disturbing the first time out, but that's the way they are, and it's true across the board. So checklist: have you ever performed a feasibility study? And if so, how did it go? And then most importantly, you really need to understand what internal resources are available in order to successfully operate and have a capital campaign. You can get direction from outside, but you still need, for the most part, a lot of these elements, whether they're in-house or you bring them in. The executive director, she will play a huge role. Director of development can act as a campaign manager as long as that their work in the other building blocks is not diluted. And that's just an assessment of who can do what among the executive team. There needs to be a dedicated grant writer. Certainly, if there's not a database manager, that has to be considered for a successful campaign. And the next, you can outsource research, design, and then marketing expertise in terms of promoting the campaign effectively. One more slide on campaign structure, number 15. Are there internal committees meeting specifically to address the capital campaign? Which is to say, beyond the development committee, if there is one, is there a committee that's being put together whose sole responsibility will be to assist in making those key connections? And generally, we call those committees steering committees of the campaign. And what's not unusual is as the campaign progresses over time, that the nucleus of that committee will grow over time as well. So you may start with a campaign steering committee of 3, 4, 5, 10, but as you meet more individuals and you bring individuals on who help to actually make more connections. So it's not a static group. It generally, in our case, it doesn't really meet as a group, but rather they are dealt with individually to ensure that the capital campaign is moving forward. What's the strategy for organizational campaign success? Here we're talking about how long should the campaign be and why. The universities, for example, strategically do 5-year campaigns because that way they hit every reunion cycle, leveraging various tactics. And so that's why reunion weekend every May, if you go back to campus, you'll note it's heavily influenced by whatever reunion year that is. And if they're in a capital campaign, it certainly will be promoted heavily. Generally, for a non-university or non-school independent school campaign, we recommend 3 years. Generally 3 years is the good number because it allows the opportunity to make sure that you're outreaching to every foundation and business and high net worth individual. So 36 months is generally a good number. And then the third bullet point, the key bullet point, I mentioned at the onset, you cannot have any nebulism in a capital campaign. There can't be, well, maybe we'll be here or maybe we'll go there. No, it has to be defined because investors will want that. You cannot go to a foundation with a thought. It has to be really well defined. Same with high net worth donors, many of whom are increasingly acting like investors. So they want to see the return on investment for the community. And in addition to the footprint, there'll be a scope of costs as well as an infrastructure build-out timeline. We didn't include architectural sketches because those aren't really necessary at the onset, but surely they'll need to be developed as part of the case statement as we progress. Finally, the last two are in terms of readiness. Anything within the organization that you should be aware of in terms of personnel, the other parts of development, or even the capital campaign itself. And then we always ask the question in planning studies, are there competing campaigns to consider that would adversely impact your organization's campaign? And that's really important. Some communities, we've seen hospitals do large build-outs, which really compromises some church build-outs. So there's tension sometimes. We tend to recommend to our clients just to ignore it if you can, but in some communities you cannot because of the impact of a particular agency. The elements of a capital campaign, it's pretty logical. The preparation phase where you do all the work that we talked about earlier. The quiet phase, and you will have identified those key prospects, those lead gift prospects, either through your well screening or just because you know of the fact that they're gifts to your institution before, really important. Whit mentioned Stanford University. Anytime we were planning for a large capital campaign at Stanford, we would go to 2 key donors first before we would launch the number. And those were the Packard Foundation and the Hewlett Foundation. Because obviously you may know Hewlett-Packard was launched at Stanford or right outside of Stanford. And the quiet phase is really the larger gifts and the key investors. You don't go to foundations in the quiet phase. They want to see traction. Lead gift phase, you can start foundation business outreach as well as other large key donors. Major gift phase, still large gifts, just not as big. By the way, the lead gift phase never ends, nor does the major gift phase. It just launched at a different time. And then the final phase generally is a community phase, which is much more interesting today than it was 20 years ago, given social media and global reach, potentially. So those are the key elements. Now, next slide is interesting. Where do capital campaigns stumble? So we looked at 5 areas. Leadership. The wrong people in leadership roles can negatively impact. Definition. Really hasn't defined the campaign and the goals of the campaign before launching the campaign. So therefore, there's confusion, and so that needs to be clear. Capacity. The organization doesn't understand or hasn't gone through the effort of understanding the capacity to support before launching. That's a destiny for complexity. Let's put it that way. Feasibility. Has it been honest with itself in terms of understanding the marketplace and whether this is really needed within the community? And then planning. Is there a real plan in place? Not a development plan, a capital campaign, rollout, and execution plan. Finally, before I pass it over to Whit, we're going to look at two case studies bi-coastally. One larger project, which was a build-out, and the other was a renovation, a smaller project. The first project, slide 19, is in San Francisco, Health Right 360, which started in the Summer of Love as Haight-Ashbury free clinics, and then morphed with Walden House, which was an agency serving women with mental health programs, as well as re-entering from being incarcerated in California, North and South California. They merged in the 70s. And then when ACA passed, a lot of agencies in that area in California just didn't have the capacity to take it on and really take advantage of it, whereas Health Right was way ahead of the curve. So they merged in quite a few agencies over the last 20 years. But essentially, they're a California-based agency, and I do mean all of California, so from San Diego all the way up to Marin, serving neediest with addiction, primary medical, mental health, and employment reentry programs. So they're really serving the neediest. So here were the priorities and structure. They wanted to consolidate all properties into one central medical and administrative center. So they actually identified a footprint. It was a 35,000 square foot warehouse that was not for sale. We literally walked into and said, do you want to sell this? Because we want to buy it. And the negotiation occurred and it happened. And that's not a bad strategy, by the way. I've seen that done quite a bit. We developed a capital campaign case statement. The leadership was assembled. Qualified prospects were assessed, triaged across 3 verticals. Government was out in this case. And we had a campaign goal of $15 million for this build out. And go to their website, you'll see. And they do serve 13 counties in California. So they're massive, and their impact is huge in terms of thousands of individuals they process. Next slide, results. The financial goal was met in 4 years. It was their first ever capital campaign, so it was a great success. The facility is fully functional, and if you're ever in San Francisco, go check it out. They even have dental now, which is a big win. And they're integrating still additional agencies, and they sold all extraneous assets, all their other buildings that they had been using around San Francisco and California. So now they're in full consolidation, and they're healthier than ever. So it was a great success. The second case study is a little different. This is a classical Catholic education liberal arts school in Rochester, New York. So the other side of the country, in St. John Bosco. So what were their priorities and structure? It's a pre-K through 8 campus in this case. They do have a high school, very small. It was an assessment of the physical plant. So we went up there and looked around, and it was really deteriorating. And there were some serious infrastructure improvements that were needed, particularly a leaking roof in several spots, as well as the floors, which were not in good shape at all. Those were the 2 key priorities. We developed a campaign case. We assembled very good leadership, very committed individuals. We qualified prospects using the well screening, and we identified key foundations, businesses, and high net worth individuals. Go to johnboscoschools.org and you'll see their website. We also assessed their high school and how that could play into the campaign. So the goal was modest. It was $180,000. But for them, it was huge because they had never done anything like this. But what happened? Next slide, 22. They met their financial goal in 16 months, which was incredible because they had never raised, I don't think, more than $27,000 in any 1 year. The new roof was installed. The floors are being redone space by space because their school's a little awkward. The spaces aren't congruent. And their first ever campaign achieved success, and it brought them a lot of confidence and further structure in terms of how they're going to continue on by redoing all of the rest of the infrastructure. So I'll stop there. I'm going to pass it on to Whit, who is going to talk about how to leverage data and the internet.
Thank you, Rob. Awesome. That was very, very informative. Really great information. I was actually pretty shocked that when you mentioned it, you really need a minimum of 20 interviews to really have enough data to determine feasibility. That really makes it a lot more manageable than I would have expected. So today I want to talk a little bit about how we can utilize some marketing strategy and managing the moves management through the donor journey. And for those of you who have been on these webinars before, I'm sure you've seen this, but it's always worth repeating and understanding. As a marketer, I look to this marketing funnel every single time I'm building out any type of campaign to really understand where the individual is in the journey that we've built from awareness of whatever problem or solution we're seeking to final engagement and or conversion. So here I have in front of you guys the marketing funnel, which really just outlines the stages of engagement that a customer has with your organization or institution. And this will really help map out a strategy to produce content that kind of guides an individual through certain steps to eventually execute or convert at a particular point. In the case of the capital campaign, this would include learning about your capital campaign's existence, then learning more about what the capital campaign is working toward and why it benefits the institution and that particular individual. That's always really important to think about. And then ultimately, their decision to hopefully engage by donating or supporting the campaign and becoming one of your long-term donors. So let's explore some of the tools and tactics that you guys can use to build these journeys and facilitate these moves management. I want to talk a little bit about the difference between a landing page and a microsite. Some organizations may decide to use a simple landing page, which is just a one single page, versus a microsite, which we'll get to in a minute. But a landing page is essentially, it tends to be transactional. It provides some information, for example, a white paper or a video, and it allows them to either request for more contact information or hopefully give a donation right then and there. So I wanted to outline some of the key components that you should make sure you have on your landing page if you choose to go with a landing page. One, you want to have your value proposition up front very, very clear. You know, as Rob mentioned earlier, ensuring that you have great visuals or video to back up that content. Producing that is going to be a really great way to engage and sort of motivate and tell the story of what this capital campaign is all about. You want very clear call to action buttons based on your campaign. So if you can get something as specific as building a new building, changing that call to action to be very specific toward whatever that end goal is. Maybe add the room or rebuild the auditorium or support this. You don't have to necessarily just stick with donate now. Get very clear and specific call to actions. Make sure that you have your fundraising thermometer and progress visible. We want to be able to show them how well we're doing. You want to show them how well you're doing and motivate people to continue to contribute and see that end goal in sight. Campaign countdowns are always helpful as well. Knowing how much longer the campaign is going to be around, it can motivate people to participate at that moment. You want your social proof of your campaign visible. Testimonials, quotes, maybe interviews with particular individuals that this means something to. If you're an educational institution, interviews with students that are going to really emotionally pull people in to engage and motivate them to participate in the campaign. You always want to make sure you have contact information and forms available. That allows people who aren't quite ready yet, they're not quite all the way at the bottom of that funnel, to maybe engage without necessarily a donation, but allows you to track that particular individual and follow up with them, provide more information, more context to the capital campaign to help motivate them to come back and participate and become a donor. And lastly, you definitely want to make sure you have social media sharing options. We never want to overlook the power of social media. So if a friend of yours is donating or participating in a capital campaign and they want to share about it, and that helps all of their individual friends understand and know what's going on. For microsites, microsites, on the other hand, allow for a much deeper dive into the nuts and bolts of a capital campaign. So not every organization is necessarily going to need a fully built out microsite, but larger institutions like university might invest in building a more robust communication strategy to showcase the different levels a capital campaign may be supporting. This also gives you the opportunity to get a little more creative. You can create individual pages for donor stories or a thank you wall, for instance. So think of this as a little bit of a larger footprint for those of you who have the resources and the time to dedicate, and maybe a larger capital campaign that would benefit from a little bit of a deeper dive and understanding about what the capital campaign is serving. So the components, some general components of what a microsite might include could be